Lima group of hostile countries to Venezuela, which of course Trump is also doing. So I want to ask you about the sanctions. The U.S. has similar sorts of sanctions against Cuba, against Venezuela, against Iran, against North Korea, and perhaps other countries. How damaging are they, do you think? And is there any kind of backlash against? Does it hurt the United States when they do that? And how far can they go before the tide turns the other way?
Well, I think once China gets so powerful that they can overtake the U.S. in terms of the not just their economic influence overseas, but the power of their currency versus the dollar. And when more and more countries start saying, okay, we've got to get away from the dollar because we do not want to be under the boot of the United States, then things will change. But until that happens, the vast majority of international transactions are still with the dollar. And the sanctions are harmful for all of those countries that you mentioned, but these ones on Iran are more draconian than any other sanctions. Venezuela can still sell its oil. The Cubans can still trade with many other countries. What they're doing to Iran is really an incredible type of squeezing the economy. They say they don't want one drop of oil to be sold after November 5th. And using the diplomatic clout and blackmailing countries, including India, that bought a lot of Iranian oil and is now buying less and less of Iranian oil. So what they're doing in the case of the Iranian economy is even worse than this.
Yeah, you were asking about people here, Jewish people who are involved. Independent Jewish voices, certainly, and then also, independent Jewish voices, but also Science for Peace. And I think that it's important to look at the whole picture, that Canada is very complicit in a range of ways. And it's not just, there's many governments that have a lot of interest in this kind of policy. And so it's not a little bit, what you're saying, I could totally agree with it, but it goes back further. Seymour Hersh and Robert Fisk, for instance, have written that, this goes way back to the 1990s, when it was actually politically advantageous to the right wing in Israel to keep on saying that Iran was close to having a nuclear weapon. When, about a year or two ago, there was an article in The Guardian saying that Mossad had said that, Iran is not, does not have a nuclear weapon, it's not developing a nuclear weapon. So there's a lot of evidence. On the side of Canada, Canada has gone along totally with U.S. policy, like in terms of NATO. It's not participating at all in the nuclear weapons, the ban treaty. Israel, for its part, is like politically very, very handy and useful. Like at the last NPT review conference, Israel deflected all attention to Iran when the original intent of the meetings was to take all nuclear weapons off hair trigger alert. So that's the other part that's very, very scary about the situation, is the nuclear threats. And this goes back to Obama, certainly, and to Bush.
And the organizations that you mentioned, can you mention them again?
Well, Science for Peace, we've done stuff on them.
What's it called?
Science for Peace.
Science
for Peace. We had the last scare around Iran, which was, I can't remember, but maybe 4 or 5 years ago. This is with Netanyahu came and the UN and his silly chart. But there was a real scare about nuclear weapons, and there was a lot of knowledge about all the U.S. bases surrounding Iran, just like the U.S. and NATO bases surrounding Russia and China and so on. I think one of the big problems actually is the anti-war movement. Is that there isn't one. It's not that the public is for war, like they elected Obama on an anti-war platform. But I think that the progressive end of it, like, you get Sanders, who votes for military interventions and so on. Elizabeth Warren, where is the opposition? There's no anti-war movement in our countries.
Well, that's why I was embarrassed when David introduced me as being, this great voice in the anti-war movement. Please don't blame me for the lack. It is, we do have to reflect that we've been terrible at building up a movement. We had a strong one under Bush. Frida, you remember how big Code Pink was in those days? We had hundreds of chapters. We had several 100,000 members. We couldn't keep up with all the support. And then Obama came in, as you said, on a mostly anti-war platform. He said he would keep up with the good war in Afghanistan, but people interpreted that as he needed to say that just to show he was tough. But he really knew we had to get out of those wars. And then he came in, and it deflated the whole anti-war movement. And then you have to look at the financial crisis that hurt people so much in the United States and that took a lot of people's attention away from international issues to domestic issues. And we thought when Trump was elected that all of these movements that had really faded away under Obama would come back up again. And sure enough, some of them did, because Trump has been so horrendous on issues around race and fomenting the racism and Islamophobia and the anti-immigrant sentiment. But we thought the anti-war movement would really build up as well. But somebody wrote something on my Facebook today that I thought was really true, which is people have become numbed to the wars because they've gone on so long. And imagine we bemoan the fact that it's so hard to get young people involved. Well, they've grown up with war their whole lives and they don't know anything other than that. And so it's kind of part of the norm. And between the pull of all the other issues that are so close to people's daily lives, and of course we would say war is too, especially when you see all the money that's being sucked away, but it's hard to get people to see that. So I think the work that World Beyond War has done, David's work has been incredible. We have wonderful people and we do have good organizations, but it's been very hard for us to get momentum. I think the Israel-Palestine part of the anti-war movement has a lot of momentum, but also a lot of pushback. But on the other issues, I mean, just look at the war in Yemen. You would think with this humanitarian catastrophe that has been called of biblical proportions, that you would have people out on the streets in the United States. And even now where for the rare moment you have CNN that is publishing the names of the companies that are providing the bombs and saying, here is a bomb from Lockheed Martin, from Raytheon, from General Dynamics, and they're bombing children in school buses. And still, when we organize a protest at the Saudi embassy or at the White House or at the State Department, we'll be lucky if we get out more than 50, 60 people. David.
Medea, do you think on top of being numbed and burned out and overworked and drugged and incarcerated and all the other explanations, do you think a big factor is that in 04, 05, there were more Democrats in DC and on TV at least pretending to be anti-war, and a lot of those activists that we had with us weren't just with us, they were obeying, they were following Democrats. And now there's a Republican back in the White House, but there's no Democrats on TV saying you should oppose the wars.
Yes, and I think that's what Judy was referring to when you talked about Bernie Sanders hardly talking about international issues at all. I mean, a fantastic campaign that made the term socialist okay in the United States. I remember when I was very young, the first time I came to Canada, I heard on the TV and they were having a debate and one person called himself a socialist. And I was like, oh my God, they talk about socialism on Canadian TV. And now you can call yourself a socialist in the United States and actually get elected and almost become president. But Bernie Sanders avoided the issues, and many of them he's not very good on. So, he takes over $350,000 from the weapons companies. And it was after his campaign, he gave his first foreign policy speech, after the whole campaign was over. Elizabeth Warren, Anne, am I right? And then we have to go in her office. We have to get down on the floor and start wailing mothers like we're Palestinians and people from Gaza before we can even get a meeting to talk about why are you saying Israel has the right to defend itself by shooting innocent people in Palestine. So, we have to work really hard, and I would totally agree with David that the Democrats are just awful, most of them. We have a few who have been good, who have been pushing, and we have to keep pushing them. I'm not giving up, but it is very frustrating to see how they are, so few of them are champions with us in trying to have a different foreign policy. That got us a lot of hands up, so let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we probably have to wrap up.
Hi, kia ora, I'm Liz Webb as well from New Zealand, where we, after 9 years of a right-wing government, we elected a 37-year-old young mother.
And Liz came all the way from New Zealand.
I mean, the level of inequality over the last 10, 20 years has just risen, and the future that we can offer our children now is not the future that I grew up with. We're struggling for people to get housing. The cost of electricity is going up. We're selling off our resources. And, you mentioned China earlier and the whole impact of that country. But we're part of, New Zealand is part of the Five Eyes Network.
As is Canada.
New Zealand, Canada, England, UK, Australia, and USA. And this is something that happens. We pay for it. Our government pays for the bases, and we give all the information to the US.
Yeah.
And God knows what they do with us. But I would just say we've just got to carry on. We've got to educate. We've got to divest. We've got to close the bases. We've just got to do everything that we can. We have no choice, and it's probably going to take a bit longer, but surely the ship is going to turn around, because we've got to put our money into what we need.
So you said the word divest, and maybe Greta, you want to say something about divest?
In what aspect of the
About what people could do, what it means?
Yeah, so divestment is taking your money out of weapons contractors, weapons manufacturers. And it's really something that you can do on so many different levels. So you can do it on a personal level if you have a 401k plan, a 403b plan, any kind of investment. But also beyond that, you can do it at the university level. If you belong to a faith institution that has certain endowments that are invested somewhere. So it's really something that you can do even on a municipal level, where we see, especially in the United States, public pension funds being invested in these weapons manufacturers. So you can go to WorldBeyondWar.org/divest, and you can use our database, which was created by CodePink, and you can enter different mutual fund institutions such as Fidelity or BlackRock, and see what sort of how they rank and like how invested they are in weapons. If they have a big red X, they're highly invested, or a green check, they're not very invested. So you can go to that website and use the database and reinvest your funds in alternatives.
It's also a citywide campaign, and when was it, Frida? Was it yesterday we got Berkeley? Yes, yesterday Berkeley. Imagine how hard it is to get even Berkeley to divest. That's how miserable things are right now. But we got to start with the low-hanging fruit, so we can get Berkeley to divest. We also had a wonderful intervention today with the head of BlackRock, which is the largest institutional financial investor, and they have billions of dollars in weapons. And the CEO of BlackRock is a guy called Larry Fink, is Isn't that convenient that his name is Fink? And so he was giving a talk today, and we have one of our Code Pink people in New York City who got up on the stage, and what did her banner say? I don't remember. It said something like,
It's on Facebook.
Larry Fink, stop investing in war. And this is another way that we can get these financial institutions to feel embarrassed that they are making profits from war. Or if any of you are Catholic or religious here, you can quote the Pope who says that these are merchants of death and that we are complicit if we are silent about the profits they make from war. So the Divest campaign is very exciting. We'll talk more about that during the conference.
It's also a successful divestment from Israel.
Yes, divestment from Israel. Did you find it?
Yeah, I found it on your Twitter account.
Oh, good. What does her thing say?
It says, divest from more, stop the killing.
Divest from war, stop the killing, you think? So we had other hands up, yes.
I think we discount young people too much. Why they don't vote is many of them are discouraged with the establishment and the people that are in power. And I know I'm from California, not Canada. I say California. And there is a change. We have a young Palestinian Mexican American running for Congress against Duncan Hunter. And hopefully he's going to win. It's beyond me. But when he was interviewed by the local Democrats, and he asked what his priority was, he said he would want to be on foreign relations committees because he went to the Gaza Strip once and no child should ever have to experience war. And he is getting a large following from college students. And I think we have to stop saying, why aren't they involved? Get them involved with the issues that they believe in.
Yes.
And that there's new people out there to replace the establishment.
Absolutely, and there are fantastic, I mean, you've probably heard the star Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's just one. There are now 5 women, and they're women of color, and they're progressive women. Yes, they don't have all the policies that we want, but they're very good. And it's very exciting that there are young people and people of color and people who are not afraid to talk about Palestinian rights who are getting elected in the United States. And that is a change and a very, very important one. We had a couple other hands that, yeah.
It's actually one of the 2 questions I wanted to ask you about. The midterm elections are something like 44 days and 4.5 hours away. Not that we're counting. We've been hearing that a number of progressive Democrats have been beating incumbents in their primaries. You were saying earlier that since 2004, 2005, there hasn't been a lot of traction for what you're doing in Washington. Is there any way? There hasn't been a lot of traction for what you're doing in Washington. Is it too soon to say how many of those people coming in will be more supportive? And if I can quickly sneak in a second question. When you were talking about what a war would look like if it broke out, and one of the outcomes would be that Iran would block the Strait of Hormuz. Does that point to something that the Trump administration would very much want to see happen, because that would drive up world oil prices and create a windfall for the fossil companies that are so strongly supporting their administration?
So on the first question, it is amazing what a few good people in Congress can do. I mean, we have a guy, Rokana, a congressman, who I was against when he was running because he came from Silicon Valley. He was one of those like cool young techie guys taking out an older, very progressive peace guy. He came in with so much energy, and he's been fantastic. He's been our champion in pushing the use of the War Powers Act around the Yemen war. He comes to our events, he speaks out, he's been really, really amazing. We have a wonderful woman that we worked very closely with for years on immigration rights, Pramila Jayapal in Seattle, who got elected. And she is a progressive champion who has not forgot her base, who works with the grassroots community, but also is constantly on CNN reaching millions and millions of people. So it is really amazing what a few good people in Congress can do. And I'm very excited about the upcoming elections. I think it is that there might be a real transfer to the Democrats. Not that I have great faith in the Democrats, but believe me, we need a change. And some of those people who have been challenging, especially the old school Democrats, are going to shake up their party. And we're working with some wonderful people in Congress who are activists like us. And so there is a base from which to work. And then your other question is, wouldn't that be good because it would drive the oil prices up?
Maybe good for Trump's.
Good for Trump's, yeah, right. I mean, maybe it would be good for the environment if the oil prices stayed high and we were forced to look for alternatives. It's a tricky one because the Trump administration also knows that American people depend on cheap oil, and that the increase in the price of oil would not be a good thing for the Republicans, would not be a good thing for the Trump administration. And in fact, in this piece that I was referring to in the New York Times today, they were saying how brilliant it was that Trump was able to convince all these countries not to buy Iranian oil, but managed to compensate for that oil enough that the prices have not gone up significantly.
So the shale fields in Texas are supplying it, and then again, that ties back to his donor base on the fossil industry.
Right.
Not to be one trade.
Yeah.
Not to keep connecting the same dots or anything, but still the same.
You're gonna get a new woman from Detroit to replace John Conyers. She's very Palestinian and very pro anti-war.
Absolutely, and we are very excited about Rashid. Yeah. So there were a couple other people who had their hands up here.
A couple of points. One, looking at this room, I basically see the image of the Great Panthers of the 1960s. And Ralph Nader gave a talk not that long ago in which he referenced the Great Panthers of that era and how he bemoaned the fact that there really aren't any Great Panthers organized in any meaningful fashion. They show up to listen to his talks, he said, but they aren't organized, and they are also not working closely with college students to get them active and organized. And so I'm wondering what you as an activist and Code Pink are doing, both thinking along the lines of bringing students at college level and reintroducing Great Panthers as a meaningful activistic group.
Well, that's a great question. Certainly, there is a important role for older people in the community to play, and older white folks too. I mean, we have a lot of privileges as older white folks and have to use those privileges, doing things like I did yesterday, getting up in that kind of venue. If you were a person of color, you would probably have been really manhandled and potentially arrested. And we certainly know when we do things in Congress that it is usually easier for us to do these things. And I would say even as women, wouldn't you say it's easier for us? So we have to use that privilege. But you can't have a movement without young people. And we are always looking for ways to incorporate more young people. There are a lot of young people involved around the Palestinian work. Why is that? Because there's been tremendous educational work done to show the connections between violence in our streets in the United States and the police collaboration between Israel and the US. there have been fabulous delegations from not only the Black community, but the Native American community in the United States and Canada to show how settler colonialism, what it looks like in Israel, and how similar that is to the genocide against Native Americans. There has been great work being done to connect a number of issues around how does war and the mass incarceration, what's the relationship? How do we connect the issues of divest from the war economy with divest from the private prison system? And divest from the fossil fuels, and what's the connection between environment and war, and the US Pentagon being the biggest polluter in the world. We have tried and keep trying, and sometimes more successfully than other times, to really work with young people about issues of grave concern to them, like student debt in the United States, and how there's no reason they should not have free college education except for the Pentagon sucking up so much of their money. And certainly we make common cause with groups showing the connection between not having a decent healthcare system in the United States and all the money that's going for war. And I do think that Cook Pink is one of the groups that has attracted young people, and we are constantly going to the schools. You get a lot of self-selected people that come to talks like this, but when we go to the universities, and I know David does a lot of talks in universities, and when we travel, we're always saying, yes, let's have a talk in a bookstore or a community group, but let's make sure we're also going to a college campus and we're doing a talk that is in a class where they have to come to that class. So that you're really talking to the unconvinced. And so we just, got to do more of that and elevate the voices of young people so that the people who are seen as spokespeople for the peace movement are not all older people, but we got a lot of young people who are the faces of that movement.
Your point well taken, because this is a university campus here, even though it's arts and design, but the number of students that are here.
But hard to correct Ralph Nader, but actually the Grey Panthers reorganized itself, and they are growing in chapters all over the country. There's a Metro Detroit, there's an Ann Arbor group that I'm part of, and they have a national network that has communication calls periodically. And the last call, they said there are about 8 new chapters that have begun. So Grey Panthers is functioning. Our group is called Public Citizen, not Ralph Nader's Public Citizen, but taking Public Citizen and seeking to say youth and age in action, which was the old motto of the Grey Panthers. And so it's still there.
Excellent.
Hi, I just wanted to make a point. I spoke twice, you're spot on with it. Last year, I went to Iran with the World Affairs Council, and the people are stunning, magic. It's a stunning, magical place. I felt safe. There's so much to do. The museums are in English. The food is incredible. See, there were plenty of Europeans there. There were Asians there, and there were Americans. The food is incredible. The only thing Donald Trump is right about is LaGuardia is a fourth world airport. I would take Tehran Airport any day over LaGuardia.
Well, I think anybody else who is not Iranian who's been to Iran? Is there anything that any of those folks want to say?
I was just a wee lad. I lived there when I was about 4 or 5. I'm Canadian. I'm a dual citizen of Canada and Switzerland. And I'm also a Canadian veteran, member of Veterans for Peace, one of the very few here in Canada, actually. Yeah, and I say that actually with a long face. It's something I can maybe talk about. We here in Canada, it's the military indoctrination is sort of family related. It's handed from generation to generation. And they also, particularly with the Afghanistan war, they recruited in a lot of rural areas. and in poor areas. So they're starting to mimic the United
The
States.
US model.
Thank you for joining Veterans for Peace.
Oh, very, very welcome. I admire your work highly.
And,
Just to make a point about Canadian politics and Iran, let's not forget our former Minister of Defense, Peter MacKay, who is married to Nazanin Afshinjan. And he's married to an Iranian woman, Peter MacKay. And he's still deeply involved in the defense industry. He's got his hands all over the Davie shipyard in Halifax. So, you know.
and is that a plus or a minus that he's married?
It's a minus.
Probably likes Iranian food. And do you want to say anything about Iran?
Well, when we were there in 2007, one of the most interesting things I think we went to was a wind farm, a wind turbine manufacturing company that we had heard about. As we were talking on the plane as we were flying into Tehran, trying to meet as many people as you could. And one person that we met said, "Oh yes, I'm part of a major industry, and we want to go see an industry, and it's on wind turbines." And so we evaded our minders one day and went out to this wind farm, which turned out to be the largest wind farm in all of the Middle East. And in fact, this Iranian company had produced massive numbers of wind turbines that had, in Iran is the largest wind turbine farm in all the Middle East. And they were exporting all of these things all over until sanctions hit. Sanctions and the computer parts for the big turbine engine were the one thing that they couldn't get. And so this whole factory was closed down, and I mean, just an endless number of these giant blades were just sitting there waiting. And so when we came back, we started a program called, what was it, Winds for Peace or something like that, where we were trying to collect some money to buy some computer parts. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great example. Anybody else who's been to Iran and wants to give some of your thoughts? Well, I'll close with a quote from Anthony Bourdain. And if you don't know Anthony Bourdain, he's a U.S. treasurer who unfortunately committed suicide not long ago, and somebody who was really helpful to Americans by bringing us the beauty of the world, going around the world to show how people eat, how they gather in their families, how they laugh, how they have fun together, how wonderful it is to learn about the world. And somebody sent me a quote from him about Iran, because he said, we traveled to Iran, and everywhere we went, we were treated with such kindness, warmth, and generosity. He said, people told us that Persians were nice, but the nicest, this is a man who's traveled all around the world, he said, we never saw that coming. And I want to end on that because those people who have been to Iran, the nicest people in the world, the most generous, kind, loving, sweet, brilliant, just absolutely phenomenal people. And so as we move forward, let's make sure we don't go to war with these people. Let's make sure we try to stop strangulating their economy and making their lives miserable. Let's find a way to stop the warmongers, both in the Canadian government and the US government, from keeping us from being friends with the beautiful people of Iran. Your country wanted to charge us so much damn money for customs, we had to send them back and hand carry them, so we don't want to carry them home again. So if you buy a book, that would be wonderful. They're a sliding scale, pay what you want.
Is everyone coming back tomorrow for the conference?
Yes.
Yes. You should, right.
And I'm happy to sign books It's here for you. Thank you so much.